whole different perspective. Last month, a group of 234 climate scientists from 65 countries published the latest international climate change report, the 6th of its kind. They had reviewed 14,000 scientific publications and over 78,000 review comments. Here are some of the headline bullet points from the report. Recent changes in the climate are widespread, rapid, and intensifying, and unprecedented in thousands of years. It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change, making extreme climate events, including heat waves, heavy rainfall, and droughts, more frequent and severe. Human influence is the main driver of hot extremes, which have become more frequent and more intense. Ocean warming since the 1970s and ocean acidification. Changes in the frozen areas of the planet, including global retreat from glaciers since 1990s, 40% decrease in Arctic sea ice since 1979, and a decrease in spring snow cover since the 1950s. Climate change is already affecting every region on Earth in multiple ways. The changes that we experience now will increase with future warming. And finally, the most important line, the climate we experience in the future depends on our decisions now. I know that climate change has been the subject of much political debate over the last couple of decades, but the evidence of climate change is now all around us for everyone to see, even those of us who do not understand the science behind it. The Washington Post this past Saturday headlined that nearly 1 in 3 Americans experienced a weather disaster this summer. In addition, the article stated 64% live in places that experienced a multi-day heat wave, phenomena that are not officially deemed disasters, but are considered the most dangerous form of extreme weather. The Post article continues with the following data points. The expanding reach of climate-fueled disasters, a trend that has been increasing at least since 2018, shows the extent to which a warming planet has already transformed Americans' lives. Record-shattering temperatures in the Pacific Northwest cooked hundreds of people to their death in their own homes. Flash floods turned basement apartments into death traps. Wildfires raged through 5 million acres of tinder-dry forest. Chronic drought pushed federal officials to impose mandatory cuts to Colorado River water for the first time. Craig Fugate, former head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and Florida's Emergency Management Division, has never known a summer as packed with crises as this one. The question he wonders is whether this calamitous season will mark a turning point in public opinion that finally forces political leaders to act. If not, Fugate asks, what will it take? Even seasoned survivors say the recent disasters are the worst they've ever experienced. People who never considered themselves at risk from climate change are suddenly waking up to floodwaters outside their windows and smoke in their skies, wondering if anywhere is safe. Of course, we know this personally in Houston as well. I'm not a scientist. I don't even play one on TV. But I can read the numerous comprehensive reports of scientists, and I can vet the sources that try to debunk them. And believe me, I have done just that. The simple fact is that climate scientists are certain that the strength and force of hurricanes has been increasing because the oceans have heated up. They are similarly certain that increasing droughts we have experienced are caused by global warming. And they are certain that the fires raging all across the western United States are more ferocious to a very significant degree because of climate change. And they are certain that human beings, what we ourselves do here on this planet, are the major drivers for these rising temperatures. I trust the doctors and medical scientists that gave us safe and effective vaccines against COVID in unbelievable record time. I don't understand the science, but I don't have to. They do, and it works. And similarly, I trust the climate scientists that say they can demonstrate the cause and effect of global warming on the natural disasters that we are experiencing today. I don't understand the science, but I don't need to. That's why they spent years in graduate schools learning the biology, chemistry, and physics and mathematics to be able to prove the cause and effect relationships. And not just prove them, but predict them. A national security strategy report that was issued in 2002, nearly 20 years ago, during the George W. Bush administration and signed by the president himself, addressed the issue of climate change. Obviously, those who prepared the report believed the evidence, the scientists, and their conclusions about climate change at that time, 20 years ago. Here's just an excerpt from that report. Economic growth should be accompanied by global efforts to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations associated with this growth, containing them at a level that prevents dangerous human interference with the global climate. Our overall objective is to reduce America's greenhouse gas emissions relative to the size of our economy, cutting such emissions per unit of economic activity to 18% over the next 10 years, which meant 2012, 10 years ago. I could refer you to numerous other reports over the past 2 decades that have predicted the situation that we are in right now, and have also made predictions about what the world may look like in 15, 30, 50, and even 80 years from now. A lot depends, naturally, on what we choose to do today, this week, this month, this year, and in the next very few years ahead. As I'm sure you know, the predictions are pretty dire about what the world will be like in 50 years if we do nothing now. The odds are that I'm not going to be here in 50 years. The odds are pretty good I won't be here in 50 years. Some of us, though, will be, and our children and certainly our grandchildren will be. The problem is that it seems like such a long time from now, and people like me, love to procrastinate and wait until the last minute. That is not a good plan in this case. The time for doing something is right now. And what better time to talk about this than on Rosh Hashanah, the day that commemorates the anniversary of God's creation. God created the world out of a primordial chaos, according to our tradition. Creation was a process of putting order on that chaos. Matter, the stuff of the universe, was organized to operate according to rules and principles of biology, chemistry, and physics. And thank goodness it does, because without these laws, we would still have chaos and we would not be able to achieve all of the wonderful things that humanity has accomplished. And on the 6th day of creation, the day that Rosh Hashanah specifically represents, God created us, humanity. And the Torah actually says that God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden, la'ovda u'l'shomra, to serve it and to protect it. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explained this verse in this way: man is not only the master, but also the guardian of nature. This is perhaps the best short definition of the ecological imperative as Judaism understands it. A guardian is entrusted with property that does not belong to him. His task is to take charge of it and eventually return it to its owner intact. So it is with nature. The world is not ours. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the Psalms tell us, a fact of which we remind ourselves every time we make a blessing over something we enjoy. It has been handed down into our safekeeping only on condition that we maintain it undespoiled. The Midrash suggests that when the Holy One created the first human being, he took him all through the trees of the Garden of Eden, and he said to him, "See my works, how lovely and praiseworthy they are. All I created just for you. Put your mind to this, that you do not ruin or destroy my world, for if you ruin it, there is no one who will set it right after you." In other words, God is telling us in our tradition, you break it, you fix it. Don't expect me to do that for you. So Rosh Hashanah represents the creation of Adam and Eve, and therefore also the charge to humanity to care for this planet. Every year we imagine on Rosh Hashanah that we are sort of having an annual performance review. As we just sang the Untitled Chapter, we come before God one by one to get our year-end evaluation. So how do you think we did this last year? Actually, we probably did not badly this time because COVID kept most of us at home, not wrecking the planet. But how are we going to face the Creator next year at our performance review? In the book of Deuteronomy, we are told, when you lay siege to a city for an extended period of time, fighting against it to capture it, you must not destroy its trees by putting an axe to them, because you can eat their fruit. You can't cut them down. And this verse gave rise to a general principle in Jewish law called Bal Tashchit, do not destroy. Do not destroy things unnecessarily. In Maimonides' Code of Jewish Law, he makes it clear that this concept applies to anything wasted. And not only trees, Maimonides writes, but even one who destructively breaks vessels, which today would include computers and large-screen TVs and cell phones and so on, or rips up clothing, or tears down a building, or seals up a spring, or wastes food. Anyone doing any of these violates the negative commandment, Bal Tashchit, do not destroy. So it's pretty clear that the Jewish tradition expects human beings in general, and we Jews in particular, to care for the environment. We need to be able to leave it in as good a condition as we received it, hopefully even better. Several midrashim suggest that humans are God's partners in improving creation, taking the raw materials that God has given us, wheat or flax, for instance, and turning them into bread and clothes. We're supposed to improve the world, not degrade or destroy it. And what better time to discuss this obligation than on the anniversary of the day this obligation was first created with Adam and Eve. So now let's consider some things that we can do to address what virtually all climate scientists say is a very big problem. The first thing is we need to face reality. We are not children who need to be protected from a fearful truth. We cannot bury our heads in the sand like ostriches and pretend it's not true. Face the truth bravely. The second thing is to demand that our elected officials take seriously these well-researched and well-reasoned reports, including all the reports by our own military, our National Security Administration, and 11 other national agencies that investigate the causes and effects of climate change. There are specific recommendations in these reports. We just need to get our elected officials to act on them. Most of the truly important things that need to be done can only be accomplished by government guidance and support, and not just in the United States, but on a worldwide effort. Fortunately, many of these things can actually be a great boon to our economy as well. We can invest in the technologies that will reduce carbon emissions from fossil fuel plants. We have that technology to reduce the carbon emissions now. We just need to make sure it's widely done. We can invest in the technologies of cleaner, renewable fuels like wind and solar power and nuclear fusion power, which may be available in the next couple of decades. We can invest in the technologies that actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere. There are such technologies now available. We only need to ramp them up to an industrial scale. We can invest in process to reduce, how can I put this delicately, cow exhaust fumes. Really, apparently cow exhaust, cows are a major source of methane gas emission, and methane is one of the most serious greenhouse gases. The livestock industry is estimated to account for 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions globally, but scientists are actually looking into ways to reduce cow exhaust. All of these technologies will be in tremendous demand all over the world. We can be at the forefront of producing these technological advances and thereby create jobs and a strong economy in each of these growing industries. And we can help poorer countries develop these same technologies in their nations. In fact, we need to help poor countries develop these same technologies. We also need governments to plant more trees for cities and parks and recreation areas, as well as state and national parks. Trees are a major source of carbon reduction in the atmosphere. Some people poetically refer to trees as the lungs of the planet. So the first thing we need to do is face the truth bravely ourselves. The second thing is to encourage the government to do the things that only governments can do. And the third thing we can do is change how we ourselves behave. We can choose to eat less beef, reducing the number of cows that need to be raised in the first place. We're not taking away people's hamburgers. You can still eat hamburgers, but perhaps we can cut back a little bit on the amount of meat that we eat. As I have said in other sermons, the Bible seems to indicate that humans were supposed to be vegetarian in the first place, and only through a concession to human desire did God allow us to eat meat from animals. Cutting back on our diet of meat, even a little bit, will help reduce the amount of cattle raised and therefore the amount of methane gas emitted into the atmosphere. We can choose means of transportation that are more fuel efficient. Hybrid or full electric cars, for instance. We can carpool more often or use public transportation or even bicycles. We can fly less frequently. Many of us have actually flown less frequently this last couple of years. But perhaps now that we are used to conducting meetings on Zoom or other platforms, business travel will be reduced in the future even after COVID is no longer a threat. We can install solar panels on our roofs. You actually can sell electricity back to the power grid if you generate more electricity than you use with solar panels. We can build more insulated homes. We can turn our thermostats up a degree or two in the summer using less air conditioning, turn our thermostats down a couple of degrees in the winter to use less gas to heat our homes. We can use LED light bulbs that require much less energy. We can bring our own coffee mugs and metal straws when we go out to drink, reducing the amount of paper and plastic we use. And generally, we can consume less, thereby requiring less energy to produce the stuff that we buy, and less energy in transporting that stuff, since we're buying less of it in the first place. And by the way, a side advantage of consuming less is we can also save more for retirement. With all of these efforts, will all of these efforts of government, investors, and consumers be sufficient to save the planet for our children and grandchildren? I'm a religious person. I believe that God has endowed humanity with sufficient intelligence and insight and encouragement to solve many of the world's problems, if we choose to do so. We certainly have in the past. At the turn of the 20th century, many scientists had come to the conclusion that the world would soon run out of food. People would be starving by the millions. The planet would not be capable of growing sufficient crops to feed humanity within a very short period of time. The reason? Because the earth was being depleted of nitrogen, and nitrogen was essential in order to grow any vegetables. But before disaster struck, a German Jewish scientist named Fritz Haber discovered a way to extract nitrogen from the atmosphere and force it back into the ground again. And he found a way to do it on an industrial level. And because of that new technology that he invented, we are all alive here today. We can do that again. We can invent the necessary technologies to reduce carbon emissions, and we can invent the technologies to extract carbon from the atmosphere and reduce the greenhouse gas effects. But this is going to take some time, and time is of the essence. And that's why it's up to each one of us now to do our part in slowing down as much as we can the rising level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It will buy us the necessary time to implement new technologies that are already being developed. And we can, and we must, encourage our governments to support the necessary research and development of these new technologies. The free market, with its emphasis on immediate profits, is simply inadequate to do it alone. When America finally entered World War II, we had to swiftly ramp up our industries to produce huge numbers of tanks, warplanes, aircraft carriers, and other military equipment. But we did it in a miraculously short period of time. And individual citizens were encouraged to do their part as well. We planted victory gardens. We recycled scrap metal and rubber. We engaged in a whole array of fuel conservation initiatives, including wearing warmer clothes in the winter to lower our own fuel consumption. There was a Share the Meat initiative and other commodity rationing programs and initiatives to support the war effort. We can do this again if we have the will and the determination to do so. Perhaps we should see this as a world war against climate change. On this Rosh Hashanah, we are reminded that God charged humanity from the time of Adam and Eve with being the caretakers of the planet to tend the garden and keep it healthy and full of life. Will we now let our Creator down? What will we say next year at our performance review? The Talmud tells a story about Honi the circle maker, that he saw an old man planting a carob tree. He asked the man how long it would take the tree to grow enough fruit, and the man replied, "It will take 70 years for this tree to bring forth fruit." So Honi asked the man, "Do you expect to live 70 more years to see this fruit?" And the man replied, "I live in a world with mature carob trees that others planted long ago so that I might enjoy the fruit. So I am now planting trees for my grandchildren to enjoy." Are we going to let our grandchildren down? What kind of earth will we leave to them? This is a call to arms, but we've got this. We can do this. We must do this. As a Houstonian, I am proud to quote the motto of NASA: failure is not an option. L'Shana Tova.